I'm Meredith Hanley, the Director of Community Capacity Building at the National Association of Area Agencies on Aging. And as the title of the session indicates, the goal of our session today is to discuss in more detail the process that communities can take to work on their dementia-friendly community initiatives. So you might have heard me talk a little bit about this yesterday in the presentation I made, but we'll be going into a deeper dive on that process today. And then what I think will be really fabulous is for you all to get to hear from two leaders with Spokane, and as introduced, Mark and Joel, and we'll definitely try to leave time for Q&A as well. Next slide. So first, I just wanted to start with a quick recap from yesterday in case you weren't able to attend that session. The Dementia Friendly America initiative is working to foster dementia-friendly communities across the country. And we do that by offering a structure and a process that helps communities join together and have a process in doing so as a community collaborative as they work to become more dementia-friendly. And this is on the next slide. Yeah, that's okay. But Dementia Friendly America is a grassroots model, and again, we aim to provide enough structure to help communities move through a process, but also with enough flexibility that it can meet their local needs. And to make sure that we have a common understanding as we're getting started here today, I just wanted to provide what we use as the definition for a dementia-friendly community and what it means to be part of the Dementia Friendly America network. So a dementia-friendly community is one that is informed, safe, and respectful of individuals with dementia, their families and care partners, and provides supportive options that foster quality of life. So that is what a community is working towards when they're working to become more dementia-friendly. And Maggie, I just realized you might have your screen share on pause. Joining the DFA network means that a community is working to become more dementia-friendly, and so they do that through a multitude of ways, but some key factors that we look for is that it's a community approach involving at least 3 sectors of community, that it includes people with dementia and their care partners in leading and guiding and planning the initiative, and that the initiative is working to adopt dementia-friendly practices and goals. Next slide would be the one with the purple background and cloud image of the community. So one more slide forward. The DFA model is all about how to bring community together. It's all about how to build a coalition across multiple sectors and to help foster changes in multiple areas of your community. The vision really being that each sector in a community has a critical role to play in fostering that dementia-friendly community. So whether it's working with businesses and banks and healthcare systems or faith communities, local governments, including first responders, neighbors and community members. And so the model that Dementia Friendly America sets forth is really to guide you through that process of how to engage with those multiple sectors. And again, and I'll be talking about this, hopefully kind of infusing it throughout my remarks, but one important thing to know is, you can start small and build from there. So you don't have to engage all these sectors all at once. We oftentimes see communities start with, say, 3 or 4 sectors, and then they grow out from there as they get some wind underneath their wings after they gain some momentum. Next slide. So the Dementia Friendly America initiative provides technical assistance, tools, and resources to help communities in taking these actions. Our goal is to help communities by laying out a roadmap, and that communities can then pick and choose pieces from that toolkit to help shape your work. What I'll be spending a fair amount of time on here today is the 4 steps in the toolkit that again are situated to help provide enough structure to help groups come together and create that shared agenda, but also flexible enough that it meets your community's local needs, that it can fit a variety of approaches, and just overall be a flexible model that works in a multitude of settings, because we do have dementia-friendly communities in very small towns, in large cities, in rural and urban, and all sorts of different setups. So that's why we think it's so important to have that flexibility. Next slide. So as a grassroots model, communities do decide their specific approach and aims. Again, some communities take a very step-by-step approach, and you'll see a lot of materials on the next few slides. Some communities kind of go through and pretty much use each and every one of those resources. And some communities more pick and choose resources that pertain. All of the communities that are part of the Dementia Friendly America network do have those components that I mentioned earlier in terms of having a community approach. They're also guided by an action team. They're involving and having the leadership of people with dementia and their care partners in planning. And then ultimately, they're adopting dementia-friendly practices and goals across sectors in their community to become more dementia-friendly. But again, it's always okay, and it's even encouraged, because we see this as a success factor in a lot of communities, to start small and focus on some of those easy wins at the outset and then expand out from there. Next slide. The 4-step toolkit guides communities through 4 main stages. So those stages are convening a group of stakeholders and forming an action team, engaging key leaders in community to assess areas of strength and future development, analyzing those needs with an emphasis on then determining priorities, and then acting together. So let's go through each of those steps in a little bit more detail. Next slide. The first stage of a Dementia Friendly America initiative is the convening stage. And this is where you're convening key community leaders and members to understand dementia and its implications for your community. In this phase, you'll determine, engage interest and readiness, and start to build that action team. So in terms of some of the steps that happen typically in this kind of stage, and again, you know, we set forth these steps as ideas to help you shape and think about how to organize your initiative, but you can, again, kind of pick and choose. You perhaps already have some champions at the table. You're here today, so perhaps you're a champion. So if you already have some champions and you feel like you already have folks at the table, you don't necessarily need to enlist new ones right from the start. So anyway, with enlisting champions, the idea is to have an initial meeting with some interested, passionate community members who recognize the impact of dementia in your community and can commit some time to this project and helping to flesh it out and develop some initial thoughts. And so with regard to discussing readiness, as a group, the idea is to discuss, is my community ready to form an action team? Are we ready to work towards a dementia-friendly community culture? Is now the right time? And as you're having these conversations, you're starting to gather information to help you build the case. So you're perhaps identifying some specific statistics to create awareness among others. We do have a lot of resources on our website to help you with that. Include in terms of tabulating some specific data points for your local prevalences. And if there is the sense of readiness, that's when you're moving forward from just a small group of a couple or a few passionate folks who are interested in this topic to then moving forward to building that action team. And the best action team members are those key community leaders and stakeholders who ideally represent different sectors that you're interested in, you know, have some thoughts that you're interested in working with as part of this initiative. Also including people with dementia and care partners in this action team, as well as people from diverse backgrounds or underserved populations to be part of that action team. And this is also where you're starting to assess some just initial timelines, particularly with the next couple steps in terms of analyzing and assessing, and then starting to kick off the effort. Now with kick off the effort, some groups do big community kickoffs at this early stage, and then others pause on that and do a kickoff later when they're more moving towards the action stage. So that's an important thing to keep in mind as well. But I encourage you to look at the resources on this slide, and you can also peruse our website to see a lot more detail on each of those resources. Next slide. Again, each of the communities has an action team, and we use the word action team, but that can mean I mean, you can use different words if you like. We have a lot of communities that call their teams coalitions or task forces or steering committees. So the terminology is up to you. The idea is that your action team would have at the hub, at its core, people with dementia and care partners. The idea is also that having different sectors represented on the action team makes it easier to then engage with those sectors later in your work. So if you know you have at least an initial interest in perhaps doing outreach with faith communities or with businesses or with the healthcare community, it's always helpful to have the input of leaders in those sectors, in those spaces, as you build out your plans to make sure activities, plans, contacts, engagement is just driven from somebody that has that particular expertise. And this is also a good time where you can consider who will do some of the weekly or monthly coordinating and convening. Will there be an organization that can serve as a champion? For example, is there an organization that, if we were in pre-COVID times, will host the meeting on site? During COVID times, is there an organization that has a Zoom account? Some Zoom accounts, the free ones, I think, expire after 40 minutes. Who will develop agendas and facilitate? So, for example, as a perhaps early person in helping to put this action team together, would that be you or your agency willing to take on that role? Next slide. Step 2 with engage your action team. This is where we start to look at assessing strengths and gaps, because there's always areas where we can do better. And specifically in this phase, you'll start to engage the broader community in dialogue to learn about your community's strengths, gaps, and ultimately priorities for action. And when I talk about, I use the word dialogue, but oftentimes this is where we start to do the community assessment. And that can happen in multiple ways. It could be in a focus group, dialogue of sorts. It could be through one-to-one conversations. But what we see a lot, and we have a lot of resources on our website to support this, is gathering information through surveys of your community stakeholders. So gathering information again on what areas of support does your community have? Where are we already doing great work, but also where are we not doing a lot of work? And of those areas, which ones are particularly important? So we see those happen through online survey monkeys. We've certainly seen that type of information be gathered through just administering a survey in person. We've seen them disseminated at a kickoff meeting, particularly if a kickoff meeting happens very early in a project and has broad participation. You have all the attendees fill out a survey and help you further shape your initiative that way. We also see a lot of communities partner with universities during this stage to help collect the data and analyze the data and provide a report back to communities as well. Next slide. In terms of the analyze step, this is where you take the information that you just gathered through that engage step. So whether it was gathering information through, again, surveys, through focus groups, through one-to-one, oftentimes, again, we do see a kind of a multi-pronged approach in the engage stage. Analyze, you're taking that information and then you're analyzing it to determine the issues that stakeholders are motivated to act on and setting goals. So if you had, 3 focus group conversations, what were the themes that came out of them? What was the most pressing priorities that arose from those conversations? If you disseminated surveys, what's the data telling you in terms of what areas, again, are being reported as very important, but not a lot of activity happening there yet in the community? And again, knowing that in many circumstances, these initiatives are grassroots. A lot of these community initiatives don't have a lot of funding allocated to them, and that's okay. We see a lot of in-kind contributions. We do see some local grants at times, and there are a few that have larger federal grants. But with the grassroots nature of these as community coalitions coming together, it's good to think of, what are our highest priorities? Where should we start? We can always grow out from there. What are our low-hanging fruit? And what is achievable now? And what will help us gather momentum? Again, get some wind underneath our wings, and then perhaps expand out in the future. And the final step is to act. So based on you've identified some priorities, and now let's develop an action plan that includes some specific activities. Perhaps ideally has designated some folks who will lead it up, members of your action team, and some timelines. And this is also an important stage where it's great to continue to raise awareness about your work with the broader community. So perhaps work to get some word out there, do some outreach. This can also be a great time where some communities that didn't do that earlier kickoff event, as they move into the action phase, do some kind of broader community outreach or kickoff event at that point, and really communicate, here's our action plan, here's what we're working on, and here's the low-hanging fruit that we've already started to implement. Next slide. So with, I just kind of building off that ACT phase, I wanted to share a few community actions that we see just to, again, kind of ground us in what we see dementia-friendly communities undertaking. So just as a few examples, we see dementia-friendly communities offering training to faith communities. We see them working with local libraries or mobile libraries to include dementia-friendly materials. We see them working with key partners to support vulnerable rural residents that have dementia during adverse weather events, for example, even. I mentioned that with some of the, the recent wildfires and such. How can you support people with dementia in some of these really challenging times? Other sample community actions, hosting memory cafes, partnering with local schools, working with businesses. Oh, sorry, you can go 2 slides ahead now. Other sample community actions, working with local healthcare experts, 1 more slide ahead, to promote early diagnosis and connection, raising awareness through dementia friend sessions, hosting dementia-friendly choirs. The list is really endless. Those are just a handful of examples. Those are mainly from pre-COVID times. But we also there are a lot of examples of COVID-related activities, and I have a slide on that a bit later as well. But again, you can just start with a couple key activities, doing outreach with the local library, bringing dementia friend sessions locally. That is a program that's active in Washington. Partner with a local school. Next slide. I also wanted to just set the stage with some questions that can be helpful to consider when you're just at the outset of planning an initiative. And perhaps these are questions in that first engage stage, even before you're at the action team stage. You just have a couple people together. You're thinking, boy, we're kind of interested in this dementia-friendly community work. What do we do beyond checking like Dementia Friendly America's website, or beyond talking with Meredith or Joel? What are some things we should be talking about as a small group? Again, we do have resources on our website, but some of the key questions you might want to consider are, again, what are your community's core strengths that could support this initiative? Are there some really great organizations that you think would be interested, or a chamber of commerce that might want to come to the table? Similarly, which key sectors would be most critical to include in your effort from the outset? We'd encourage you to brainstorm at least 3 that you would anticipate working with. Next slide. And knowing that dementia-friendly community efforts often start small with a few passionate stakeholders that come together initially, you can make a list of a couple more. So, you have maybe 2 or 3. What are some more movers and shakers in your community who you think might have a stake in this effort? And sometimes, we've certainly had communities where they are aware of a local business leader that has a family connection with Alzheimer's disease in a way, or even a local elected official. And so inviting those folks and engaging them, because folks that have that personal connection oftentimes just really get behind this because they see the importance of supporting people with dementia and care partners at the local level. And then beyond those movers and shakers, just start to brainstorm, who else might we want to have in our action team? So again, these are just some initial questions that you can start to brainstorm early in your initiative. Next slide. Just a couple more questions. You can also start to think, how best can we ensure the active role of people with dementia and their care partners in planning our dementia-friendly effort? I'd encourage you to list 3 ideas and have that at the front and center as then you build out your work. So you always remember that we need this inclusion, we need this leadership, because our initiative will be more authentic and more helpful to people with dementia if we have that input and guidance throughout the way. And if you did have a chance to see my presentation yesterday, there were some specific ideas that I went over in that way as well. Also, just at the end of today's session, for example, you could think of 1 or 2 specific action steps that you could take after this meeting and after this conference. Is there somebody else that you think might be interested in going in this with you? Maybe it's as simple as sending them an email and sharing them a link to the conference and just saying, hey, I'd love to do a virtual cup of coffee and chat about some ideas with you. Next slide. So some tips. Again, I think I've hopefully reinforced this a lot throughout today's, but also yesterday's presentation, the importance of the involvement of people living with dementia and care partners, having an action team with cross-sector involvement, whether it's healthcare, local government, or faith leaders, or local social services, but having that broad cross-sector involvement and ensuring that team represents the diversity within your community as well. I also think it's always important to think about sustainability at the outset, and oftentimes a critical aspect of sustainability is with the leadership of the action team. So typically there's some type of chair or leader of that group. Will it be a rotating chair? Will it be where somebody's in that term for 1 year or 2 years and then it rotates to a different person? Is it an assigned staff role from your champion organization? But having a long-term strategy for that, so that if one person leaves, and particularly if it's a leader, that you have a plan for how the initiative will continue to move forward. And with staff, that can be important, if there's staff turnover or such, just to have that long-term strategy. Identifying the champion organization, as discussed, can be really helpful. If you have an organization working with you on this, again, whether it's that if they can allocate a slice of a staff member's time, that's always really, really fabulous. If they can help pull together any background research and statistics, if they can help do the agendas and the notes, that type of thing can help to move initiatives forward. Using data to plan your initiative. Also recognizing and celebrating all accomplishments. Don't forget the small ones, because even, those baby steps should be counted too, because you are doing great work. I'd also encourage you to evaluate your progress, both the outputs and the outcomes. Outputs are always easier. How many trainings did we do? How many people did we reach? And Dementia Friendly America is also putting together an evaluation guidebook that'll help give communities more tools on outcomes tracking as well. And that should be ready early next year. Also, just remember, it's okay to start small and build out from there. Take it one bite at a time and look for easy wins and low-hanging fruit. And I think that has been one of the real strengths of Spokane, which you'll hear about later as well. Next slide. So just to wrap up with a couple slides pertaining to COVID, because this is, one of the critical issues of our time is how can we do our work, but in this somewhat new world that we're living in. And I will say, in the contacts that I have with dementia-friendly communities, both new ones that have come aboard recently and existing ones, they are continuing to do this work just differently, and in some ways with a different emphasis, because they are looking at how to support people, particularly during COVID times, with the needs that they have now. And so we have seen a lot more information on addressing social isolation and addressing loneliness and increasing engagement, even when people are staying at home more. So in terms of COVID adaptations, I think one great idea is, and if you're early stage in this process, this can just be baked into your process, but gathering feedback from caregivers and people with dementia on what do you need the most right now during COVID? How can we be the most helpful as a community collaborative? We see a lot of communities ramping up outreach campaigns, and some of them have even gone back to snail mail. A lot of, moved to more virtual or electronic formats, but people do appreciate seeing something in the mail. And so we've seen some some go back to those types of outlets, or starting community drives to send postcards to people that are living, for example, in long-term care residences, where again, receiving a piece of mail with a nice note can really brighten a day. Speaking with the local libraries can certainly be an activity as well, as about joint activities. Next slide. And then we see a lot of just pivots to virtual, whether it's virtual trainings, virtual memory cafes, virtual choirs, giving voice in organization, has some resources on that. Virtual support groups, virtual health and wellness opportunities for people with dementia. And it's always a great, it's never a bad time to promote your work. So you could even just do a general webinar for your community, do a Zoom call, telling folks about what you're up to. And that could also be a great time to gather some input. So next slide. And as I wrap up here, I just wanted to again plug what we have to offer at Dementia Friendly America. Our resources are downloadable, they're customizable, so they're meant to be tailored to your local needs. We have webinars for communities that join up with us, a listserv, technical assistance, that's phone calls or emails with myself, for example, access to branding. So we really look at how we can support communities. And so if you're interested in this work, you can go to the next slide. You can have my contact information here, and would always be happy to connect with you guys. So with that, Joel, I believe it is your turn.
Hey, thank you so much, Meredith. And I also want to thank you and Dementia Friendly America for all the assistance that you've given to the Dementia Friendly plan here in the Spokane area. So next slide, please. Okay, next slide. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of history on how we got started with Dementia Friendly here in the Spokane area. And that'll also help me to talk to you about some of the things that went really well and some of the pitfalls, show you some of the pitfalls so that you don't fall into those pitfalls. So where all this really got started was with the Washington State Alzheimer's and Dementia Plan. I am one of the members of the Dementia Action Collaborative. You might remember yesterday, Lane Cordy talked to you about the Dementia Action Collaborative, or short, we call it the DAC for short, and how the DAC is implementing the Washington State Alzheimer's and Dementia Plan. So I happen to serve on one of the subcommittees with Mary Grace Becker, and Mary Grace and her work team are spearheading the dementia-friendly parts of the state plan, and so I had picked up on Dementia Friendly America and brought it back here to Spokane. One of the other committees I serve on is the Spokane Dementia Action Team, or SPODAT for short. It was formed in 2014 to decrease readmissions to hospitals, and also just to help families and people with dementia by training providers. So the idea being that we wanted to educate physicians and other medical professionals around Alzheimer's and other types of dementia, which we really identified a need here for in Spokane. So semi-annually, we do an education seminar. Now they're webinars because of COVID, for physicians. So I brought this idea back to this team and I said, hey, what do you think about if we were to investigate the possibility of developing a dementia-friendly plan for the Spokane area? And everybody thought that was a great idea. Next slide, please. So what the Spokane Dementia Action Collaborative did was put together a full day dementia summit. And we had Lynn Cordy from Aging and Long-Term Support Administration / the DAC, and Mary Grace Becker, also from the DAC, come over and talk to us about what Dementia Friendly is all about. Meredith, you would have been just proud of their presentation about Dementia Friendly Communities. They did a wonderful job. We had there at that summit 125 people from around Spokane, and the idea to include, as the slide tells you, then Spokane Mayor Condon was also in attendance, along with people from residential care facilities and home care agencies, people with dementia, family members, law enforcement, fire department, just a whole wonderful cross-section from Spokane. And the idea was to introduce them to this idea and to see if there was interest in developing a dementia-friendly plan. And from that, we had people who raised their hand and said, yes, I would like to be a part of that process. I think it was somewhere around 38, 40 people that were interested in being on a work group to start the process. Other people were interested, they just and were willing to support it. They just didn't have time to be on the group. So next slide. So we brought everybody together a couple months later for an initial team meeting. So we were going to begin to develop our action team. And what a couple lessons learned from this meeting for you is, keep in mind that the good news is people are very passionate about Alzheimer's and dementia. The bad news is people are very passionate about Alzheimer's and dementia. So what I mean by that, and I'm joking a little bit here too, what I mean by that is that people were not really interested in the plan. We want to develop something now, today. We want to implement. And that really wasn't the idea. And down the road here in the presentation, Mark's going to tell you about how we address that need with the current structure that we have for our action team. So the other thing that we learned from that meeting and other subsequent meetings was that we're going to need a staff to organize. We're going to need somebody whose job it is as either a part-time or full-time position to help organize this. Because initially we were just talking about developing a plan. And I would also ask you to consider reaching out to Meredith and Dementia Friendly America, because I'm not sure that we also fully understood at that time that you don't have to have this big plan to implement Dementia Friendly. There are some things that you can do, some, as Meredith mentioned earlier, some low hanging fruit that you can initially go for. You know, Dementia Friendly can take many forms in your community. It doesn't have to be a Dementia Friendly plan. Next slide, please. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my partner in crime, Mark Haberman, and Mark can take you through how we got the ball rolling with our action team.
Good morning. Thank you all for being a part of this group, and I'm pleased to continue to tell our story. So we had this big gathering that didn't bring our desired outcome in December of 2018, and so we started in January of 2019 with a much smaller group, and our Area Agency on Aging and Long-Term Care, the organization for whom I work, had dedicated a slice of a couple of staff people's time. Our former Planning and Resource Director and myself, at that time, our Planning Coordinator. And that group included some social service professionals. It included medical providers, persons living with dementia and their family care partners. And our goal was to begin strategically building a sector-based action team. We chose to begin with 6 sectors, which are nearly identical to the 7 with which we are working over a year later. Our process at that point was to highlight community leaders with significant gravitas that could convene and lead a team representing each sector. And we set out to determine who would that significant community leader be. We worked January, February, March that year, and we determined a couple of things. This was going to be a really big job. And the slice of leadership that our agency was able to provide was not going to be sufficient to the need. We also, as an area agency, it was time to develop our full-year area plan, our 4-year area plan. And additionally, our planning and resource director resigned, and I became interim planning and resource director, so was really carrying that area plan development process solo. We determined to seek foundation funding to fund a year or 2-year-long staff position solely dedicated to leading this community-based effort. We were unsuccessful in the spring and summer of 2019 in securing that funding. Next slide, please. By the autumn of 2019, 2 significant things happened. The Community Benefit Fund at Providence did provide some consultant support. We thought, if we can't fund a full staff position, let's at least, because we're almost 2 years out of the gate now and have had kind of a non-linear process, let's hire a consultant to help us navigate kind of where we've been, where we are, and where we determined to go. And we went right to the top and found Meredith Hanley. Can't recommend her too highly. So we had this kind of block of money that enabled us to buy time with Meredith. Also, aging and long-term care, again, my organization, I was permanently in the planning and resource director role at that time. And our executive director, Lynn Kimball, was doing some restructuring of staff and departments, and she provided within our planning and resource department bandwidth within 3 different staff positions. Mine as planning and resource director, Cindy Fine, who now was our planning coordinator, and Savannah Reams-Taylor, our new community outreach specialist. So we had a couple of planner types with dedicated staff time and just a dynamic community outreach person. Next slide, please. We worked that fall to prepare the way for what would happen in 2020. And we talked some with Meredith Hanley, and by February 7th, 2020, Meredith Hanley was in Spokane, Washington from the East Coast to spend a full day with us. Again, this was a similar sized group that had met in January, February, and March, and represented several sectors of the community. Meredith came in understanding our history, and she talked with Joel and with me and had some of our former documents as well. Meredith listened, she facilitated a robust reflection and helped us look down that long road ahead. We were really engaged. Next, she provided us connectivity by phone or Zoom, and this was before COVID, to two other dementia-friendly communities, one in the state of Maryland and one in the state of Nevada, both of whom were in counties of a similar population and demographic as Spokane County, and we intended to focus on the county as a whole. And also they had county seat of similar population as well. We were able to hear their stories, what worked and what they would have done differently, and to ask our questions. And a primary learning that we heard from both of those communities was to begin small. We were not going to build a committee for each sector. We were not going to seek a person of gravitas from the get-go to lead each of those. We just would not have gotten ourselves moving. Later that same month, and our early action team met, and its two broad goals were to continue to build our local structure, that action team and a couple of sub-teams, and to create our application to Dementia Friendly America. So, and a third was to begin the work of implementing the 4 phases of the toolkit. Across the summer, a couple of significant things happened. I'd been chairing the action team, and we brought on Joel as co-chair. You know, I've been around the block with community-based organizational work, but had only about 4 years under my belt in Spokane. I'd worked in North Idaho for over 25 years. Joel had all the local contacts, and so I think we've been a great team together. Across the summer, we built out our action team to about 15 people representing 7 community sectors. Our community engagement sub-team is driving a survey process. We also utilized Meredith and what we'd learned from the Nevada community to develop a single survey to engage the community, step 2, rather than a community, sector-specific community survey for each, again, for each sector. We also put together an activities team. We didn't want to get the cart ahead of the horse, but we wanted to try to figure out what's some of the low-hanging fruit that we could be ready to implement and expand rather than waiting for our full plan. Currently, we are in that step 2, engage. Our survey has been open and active since late August. It will close on the 9th of October, and we will work with step 3 throughout the autumn months, analyze to understand what it is our community has said to us about strengths, gaps, needs in the care of those living with dementia and their family care partners in our community at large. Secondly, that's the Dementia Friendly America piece, which again, April 23rd, 2020, we were recognized as the first dementia-friendly community in the state of Washington. Our application had been approved. Want to mention that. But also Dementia Friends is that person-to-person educational and call to action piece that Meredith has described, and our organization has become a regional lead organization for Eastern Washington, working with Mary Grace Becker. Cindy Fine, our planning coordinator, a Spokane nearly native who has a tremendous history as a local health health educator and trainer, is our master champion. So we look forward to continuing this process as a dementia-friendly community and to implement Dementia Friends and to benefit from the synergy that can come from both of those very important programs working together. Next slide, please. I'm about out of time and we want to allow for some questions, but that's what's really gotten us to this point. And we also learned, I just want to summarize by saying that, again, people are so passionate and there is this desire to want to do it all. And even when you've decided to work on small things, really have to work to kind of prioritize and recognize this is not a sprint, this is a marathon. And I've completed one of those actual real marathons, the running kind. And I can tell you that the second half of that running marathon has its own purpose that is very important, and it's still a part of that marathon, part of the journey. And so just balancing all of those things. Joel's and my contact information is on this final slide. And